Thrilled to be presenting the, I don't know, sixth-ish iteration of Stories on the Lawn. I didn't go back in time to figure out what number this is, but this is really one of my favorite things that we do here. A house is a home because of the people who are associated with it, and those people have stories. And so our opportunity to share Austin community stories is really, I think, very important to what we do. So we're thrilled to be a part of this programming. I just want to point out that for those of you who are maybe less familiar with us than others, keep an eye on our website because we do tons here. Yes, we are a historic house museum, but we are so much more than that. Several upcoming things. Next Thursday night, absolutely free and with cocktails of some sort. Yet to be determined, will be an artist talk with Reggie Thomas. It is her work you are seeing in here. The second half of the show is upstairs. Feel free to go take a look at that when we have a pause. Reggie's phenomenal. She's been in Austin since the mid to late 1970s. She began as a glass artist, and that is her glass work that you see in the cabinets. And actually painting began as a hobby for her. And you, I think, can see the influence of glass actually in her painted work. So she'll be here next Thursday night talking about her work. And then at the end of the month, if you're a classical music fan, we have a harp and oboe duo who will be with us. They're called Duo da Capo. It's on March 30th. And their first concert, which was on Valentine's Day, was just phenomenal. They just blew it out of the park. And I will tell you, a lot of what we do here is very intimate, just like tonight. And when you've been to the Austin Symphony, I love the Austin Symphony. I'm not dissing them in any way, but you're like 50 feet away, right? Even if you're at the front of the orchestra section. Here, you're 5 feet away, and there's a completely different experience when you are around the performing arts and in that intimate setting. It's really going to be incredible. Then, on April 7th, biggest day of the year for us, we annually host an egg dyeing event on Good Friday. Egg dyeing began actually in Ukraine around 3000 BCE. This is not a Christian tradition. It is an entirely pagan tradition. And Pizanki is really quite incredible. And we help learn how to share, decorate eggs in a variety of different ways. So just want to come dye an egg yourself, please do. All of this is on our website. So now that you've heard the ad pitch from me, I am going to turn it over to Susan Mack, who is your MC this evening. It is thanks to Susan that these stories on the lawn and or room are occurring. It was her brainchild, and we're so thrilled that she had the idea. So thank you, Susan. So y'all, it's Texas Independence Day. Now, I'm going to say I personally am pretty fascinated by Texas Independence Day because I did not grow up in Texas, which means I did not get the 7th grade year-long expansive to the point of ad nauseum introduction to Texas history. In fact, living in Washington State, it's remarkable that I got taught anything that might resemble Texas history, given that we were not Texas. But we did actually learn something about Texas independence because it was important to the westward movement and the greater formation of the United States. And what I learned was pretty much Texas used to be part of Mexico. They fought a war for their own independence. Something happened at the Alamo, but I couldn't quite tell you what it was, except that James Bowie, who invented a knife, died there. But he is actually no relation to David Bowie, who was far more important to my middle school English. And they won the war, they got to become their own country. And then they realized this isn't as good as being part of the best country in the world, the United States of America. So we're going to petition to get in. This was my understanding of Texas history as a, I don't know, probably long after high school. But then I moved here. And I still didn't learn about Texas Independence Day right away.
It happened more after I got on Facebook and I'd see pictures of some of my Texan friends who on March 2nd would go to the family ranch wearing cowboy boots and eat lots of barbecue and blow things up. And before they blew things up, they probably sang that stalkerish song of "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You" instead of playing the 1812 overture like we would for American Independence Day. But it was kind of fun. And then we get to today, where Rowena asked me if I would lead in with a little talk about Texas Independence Day. So I had to go actually dig deeper. And I found out that on this day in 1836, 59 white Texans signed a document saying, we are not going to be part of Mexico anymore. And like the American Declaration of Independence that had been signed roughly 60 years earlier, it had words like liberty and life and inalienable rights and happiness. But it's a much longer document than the US Declaration of Independence, which is not surprising because everything is bigger in Texas. And it had this long list of grievances to explain why they needed to not be part of Mexico anymore. And to understand the context of these grievances, we have to go back 13 years prior to the signing of this document to 1823. That is the year that Stephen F. Austin, with some kind of magic persuasive power, convinced the Mexican government that it would be a good idea to move Americans into Texas. And they actually granted him this land grant that said Americans who want to come to Texas can get cheap, if not free land, and not pay taxes for 10 years, thereby establishing the long-term culture of Texas of cheap land and low taxes. So naturally, Americans came flooding in, many of them from Kentucky or Tennessee, very excited about this prospect of building wealth in this new land of Texas. Well, as they got there, at the time they came, Mexican had a representative democracy with a constitution and state governments. Now, Texas didn't get its own state government. It had to be combined with Coalinga, which was much more Mexican than these new white people really liked, but it was still a state government of some sort. But then in the ensuing years in between 1823 and 1836, and things had changed with the Mexican government. There were different governments. Santa Anna took over. Santa Anna had lots of revolutions going on all over Mexico, and he did not like this. So he abolished the Constitution, and he took away state governments, and he even sent troops into Texas. And so when you read this document, the document talks about these things. It talks about wanting a constitutional government, wanting the right to own property. It basically said, Mexico, you changed the game on us. You promised us our own state government. When we asked for one, you put Stephen F. Austin in jail. Forget it, bye-bye. We're going to be our own country. Now, if you just read the document, these values sound like American values: representative democracy, constitutional government, freedom, life, liberty, happiness. It also has a word, property. Property was a code word for the word that was missing in this document: slavery. Because in 1823, the same year that Stephen F. Austin magically convinced the Mexican government to give him this land grant, was also the year that Mexico decided it was going to limit slavery. And they said, no new enslaved people. The only people who can be enslaved are the ones who are already enslaved in Mexico. And by the way, if you're under 12 years old and you're enslaved, you get to be free on your 12th birthday. That's what they said in 1823. Then, in 1829, they decided that wasn't good enough, and all slavery was abolished everywhere in Mexico. What do you think the Texans did? They ignored this completely. Stephen F. Austin even tried to basically make sure that no one knew about this. Maybe because he was pro-slavery, or maybe he was just afraid of what would happen if people found out. I don't know. But the historical record shows him trying to quash the announcement of this. Well, the Mexican government did not like this very much. So 5 years later, they actually passed laws that said, no, really, Texas, you have to not do this slavery thing. And by the way, you have to start paying your taxes. And when they sent Stephen F. Austin to say, you know what, instead of doing that, why don't you let us be a separate state in Mexico and govern ourselves? Where is the motivation to say, yes, you people who are completely ignoring the laws of the land should get to govern yourself. In fact, we're going to send troops to try to quash this rebellion. And that is how the Texas started. Now, this is not the version that anyone anywhere near my age got taught in school. It is not the version that the Texas state government really likes to have around, given their attempts to quash that book of Forget the Alamo that talks about all this stuff, and their laws that actually ban the teaching of these things in classrooms. I personally do not like this, because I think that if we don't understand the ways that race and slavery and other issues of oppression that we might not like have influenced the structures of our society, we never have a hope of being independent of them. And what I'm going to say is that here's my plug for the museum. This place, with their modern times history lectures and the various work they're doing, has become a place where they really try to represent multiple viewpoints of history. Because one story about freedom and representative government has accuracy, and one story about slavery has accuracy, and we need to be able to look at the combination of them if we're going to understand them. So now that you've gotten your history lesson, we can move into more personal stories about independence. We have a great lineup of storytellers tonight. And I want to start off with my friend Josh Davis, who is a storyteller, a D&D player, and an excellent dance instructor, who often will make a plug for everyone to go over to the Texas Women's Association for swing dance lessons when this is over.
Literally next door.
But right now, I want Josh to come up and tell us his story.
Thank you, Susan. I hate to segue away from that topic because there's so much to unpack. But instead, let's talk about my childhood. Much like the state of Texas, as a child, I was always ready to declare independence. I may have been dependent on my parents in a lot of ways, but they no longer felt like adults to me. I knew they were getting divorced before they did. I even asked, and they said, no. But in the end, I was right. And I realized that I couldn't depend on them for my emotional needs. So I became a very withdrawn child. And they split when I was about 9 years old. I remember because we went to Hawaii on vacation, and that was kind of the last hurrah. My father and I always had an adversarial relationship as far back as I can remember. He loved teaching me things. He taught me the basics of algebra before I ever got to even junior high. But he seemed to enjoy when I didn't know the answer so much more when I did, and it was not lost on me. So I kept things to myself. My fears, my hopes, the fact that I didn't like going upside down on amusement park rides, random example. And ever since my parents split, I would see my father once a week and then also every other weekend. One of these weekends, he picked us up in the suburb of Downers Grove, Illinois, where we grew up, and just started driving. And he wouldn't tell us where at first, but it turned out we were on a road trip to meet up with our cousins and go to an amusement park called Cedar Point in Ohio, right on the lake. An amusement park that, as some of you may be aware, is full of roller coasters. So I was less than thrilled when I finally pried the truth out of Dad, and he didn't really understand why, and I wasn't about to tell him. But we got the rest of the way there. 5 hours on the road. Step out of the vehicle, get in line, get our tickets, go in. And he says, "All right, Josh." And I look at that roller coaster and I see that it has a loop that goes upside down. And I go, "No, I don't like that one." And he goes, "Well, how about this roller coaster?" But sure enough, that roller coaster also went upside down. So I said, put the kibosh on that. He points at a third one, and I realize I'm going to have to get creative if I want to keep my secret. So I pause. I stroke my chin as if I'm mulling it over carefully, as opposed to knowing immediately the answer. And I go, I don't think so. But after about 5 of these interactions, my father figured out that I was not going on a roller coaster on this trip for whatever reason that was to remain unspecified. So he said, "All right, how about we go parasailing?" Now, in my 11 years of life, I had never heard of parasailing. And if I had known what it was, I might not have been so quick to say yes. But I did not, and I knew that it was not a roller coaster that went upside down. So I jumped at the chance to prove myself. Let's do it. And next thing I know, we're on a boat with a crew of 3 men and some strange harness device. And the men ask all of us sitting on this boat, who wants to go first? And everyone freezes because this is kind of intense. And I know it's kind of intense too, but my hand's already in the air. So by the time I realize I maybe should have put it down, it's too late. And I'm plodding heavy steps toward the edge of the boat where I'm getting strapped in, still a kid, still amused that it kind of looks like funny underwear, just like with rock climbing. Get strapped into this harness. There's this big rig with a parachute behind me to catch the wind. And they drive the boat forward. And I start to rise into the air, higher and higher. I felt like I was hundreds of feet up. Only tethered the boat by this rope, held by these 2 crewmen, my one lifeline. But it was a beautiful sunny day with fluffy clouds in the sky and people splashing and having a wonderful time on the water. It was a little too cold from up there, hundreds of feet up in the air. But the beauty of the scenery made it worth it. I was terrified, but I was also having an amazing time. I'd never experienced anything like this before. And maybe that's why I didn't notice at first when something was wrong. I felt this memory of this episode of The Simpsons, of all things, where it's one of the Halloween episodes where Bart Simpson is on a bus and there's a gremlin that's crawling on the outside of the bus, dismantling things, tearing pieces off. And that image was in my head because I realized what it was. There was a noise that had not been there before. There was a vibration. The pieces of this rig were clanging together. And I felt sure that sooner or later, they would vibrate apart. And I may only have been 11 years old, but I knew that from hundreds of feet up in the air, when you land, the water is not soft. So I looked over the scene in front of me. Again, such a perfect sunny day. Knowing that these might be my last moments in my young life. And I looked at the beauty surrounding me and I thought, you know, it's been a pretty good run. And if I have to go, at least It's on a day like today, full of so much beauty and so much joy. And I made my peace in that moment with life and with death. And then I looked down and I saw the two crewmen shaking the rope. Thank you.
I'm going to admit, when I heard Josh tell me that story in practice, my response at the end was profanity. But I'm not going to say here. Empathetic profanity, which I believe many of you probably had in your heads. Our next storyteller is also going to talk about an important moment in the process of childhood to adulthood, but from a different perspective. We have Wendy coming to talk about teaching our child to drive. Perhaps equally terrifying.
All right. It's maybe the fourth time that we're out practicing driving. We're in a big empty parking lot in an office building close to our house. It's a Sunday morning, and I'm with my 15-year-old daughter, Emmy. She's very enthusiastic, super smart kid, and we're working on backing out. We're just backing out of an empty parking lot, and every single time that she does it, she cannot remember which way to turn the wheel or how far. And she gets all flustered, and she definitely hits like 3 imaginary cars every time. And we do it over and over. And I finally turn to her and scream, "Emmy, it's physics." And she turns to me and screams, "I haven't had physics yet, Mom." And that sums it up in a nutshell. I'm a terrible passenger. I'm always like grabbing the dashboard and stomping on an imaginary brake. And that is with the safest driver I know, my husband. If you put me in the car with a teenage driver, it is like a highlight reel of all of my worst qualities. It is, I'm nervous, I'm angry, I'm impatient, I'm a mama bear on steroids, and it just, no one is happy. My son, my younger son, had no interest in ever learning how to drive, probably because of this experience. He was fond of telling me that he didn't need to learn how to drive because there would be self-driving cars when he came time for him, and he would just skip over all of that. And then the poor kid turned 15 in the middle of a global pandemic and didn't have to go anywhere. Everyone was holed up at home. There was no reason to go anywhere. And I was in no rush to push him along. And then Emmy left for college, and we were down one kid. And you know, by having all this extra time to get him where he needed to be, which was literally just to school and home, because that's all that he was doing, it was so easy. It was really easy until one day it wasn't. I think we all remember how it was when everything opened back up and we could go do things in person. And it wasn't just a thing or two. It was like every single thing was available in person. And we had all of that lost time to make up for. And it was time to just go, go, go. So he went from sitting in his bedroom doing online school and playing video games with his friends to needing to be driven. He needed to be driven to school, to work, to martial arts 3 times a week, to friends' houses, to Dungeons and Dragons. And the one that really almost killed me, to his summer job at Camp Half-Blood, which is a really awesome summer camp that takes place at McKinney Falls State Park, which is 20 miles from our house. 20 miles each way in Austin traffic. So every trip took 45 minutes or more. I would take him there, come home. A few hours later, I'd turn around and go back and pick him up, wait while he finished all of his duties, and we would just start the slog back in Austin traffic. And it was over 3 hours in the car every single weekday for the entire summer until I just didn't think I could do it for one more day. And that's when he came to me and he finally said, "I want you to teach me how to drive." And I was overjoyed. I couldn't believe he finally was ready to learn. He was finally motivated to learn, and he wanted me to do it. And I was so excited that I just almost put the blinker on right then to pull into a parking lot and like just start right in that moment before he lost his nerve. And as I did that, it dawned on me what I was about to go through again. And I just thought, not again. So we started really, really small. We go back to that same parking lot in the empty office building on a Sunday morning, but this time we're laughing. We're laughing about me yelling at his sister that it's just physics. And he thinks it's funny because he's taking physics now. So he's going to be better. We also got pulled over by the security guard of the office building because we just were circling the same path over and over again for an hour. And they were suspicious of us. And then we made our way onto the smaller neighborhood roads, and slowly but surely it got better, and it went really well. I couldn't believe it. I think that some combination of this kid playing video games for his whole life and just having a really chill personality combined to actually make him a really safe and reliable driver. And it went really well. And except for the other Austin drivers, which you know who you are, whew, that was the rough part. But really, he did well, and it was time. And we made a plan for him to take his driving test. And so it's about 2 weeks before it's time to take that test. And a neighbor reaches out and offers actually to take Khalil to school every day for the whole week. And I get so happy. I start thinking about, like, what am I going to do? I can go to the hike and bike trail, or I can take the dogs for a walk, or have an extra cup of coffee. But he's not having it. He comes in and tells me, Mom, I don't want to ride with Julian. I want to keep practicing with you. And I think, you're ready. Like, you're ready to take this test. It's driving to school. You've done it 100 times. But he comes in with a zinger and he says, Mom, I can't believe you don't want to spend these last few weeks with me. Well, you know that once I get my license, you're never going to see me again. And that joke for him put me into a full-blown existential crisis. It really landed hard. I thought about it, and he was right. I don't know how I'd forgotten. I had done this once before. I wasn't going to see him again. And those hours in the car were horrible and brutal, but half of those hours in the car, he was my captive audience. And we, spent so much time together. There's something really magical for parents and kids when you're in the car because you're both facing the same direction. You're not making eye contact, and you have the radio, and it's just kind of low stakes. And kids talk, and he talked a lot. I learned way more about Khalil in those commutes than I had in a long time. And I learned that I love this kid. He was funny and witty and like an awesome road trip buddy, and I was gonna miss him. And I realized that for both of us, like, we were about to get this longed for independence. I had been so focused, like, get this kid his license and I'm going to get my life back. For him, that independence was going to be exciting and new adventures and new things to do. And all of a sudden it hit me really hard that what was my independence going to look like? It felt paralyzing and it felt lonely, and it made me wonder, like, what's my purpose now that my kids don't need me? And that was my mindset when we pulled up to take his driving test. We had this really amazing woman named Jan, and she was a retired school teacher with a gift for alleviating anxiety, his and mine, which was great. She took him for a practice run and then put him through his paces, and he passed with flying colors. And Jan called us together, and we had this little meeting at the end where we talked everything over. She made a point to tell Khalil that this wasn't the end of him learning how to drive, but just the beginning. And I was going to keep telling him things and giving him feedback. And she knew that would annoy him because he already knew it, but he had to listen anyway. And it was like she had been a fly in the car of our vehicle the whole time, because that's what he would say, is like, Mom, I know, why are you telling me? But because Jan said it, he listened to it. He was willing to take it in. And it made a really big difference. But then Jan went in, and she got real serious and looked him really sternly in the eyes. She said, you need to be really sweet to your mom right now, because what's about to happen to her is really hard. You're about to get your license and you're going to go off and have fun with your friends. But for your mom, every time you get behind the wheel of that car, she's going to have a light flashing in her eyes, in her brain, saying, he might die. He might die. So I was so glad that they were in this intense conversation, because it gave me time to wipe away the tears from what she had just said. This woman, this almost complete stranger, had just cut through a lifetime of parenting, a lifetime of stepping on the imaginary brake pedal and mama bear growling. And she just said the thing that I had felt from the first time I ever held both of my babies. They might die. And it felt like my job was to keep them alive. And how do you reconcile that with putting a kid behind the wheel of a car? Somehow hearing those words from Jan and getting her validation and understanding that everything I was feeling was really normal is what finally gave me the courage to hand the keys over to Khalil and let him drive away.
Thank you, Wendy. Like I said, we had one form of terror. We had another form of terror. And now we have my friend Abel Lomas, who is an improv artist and a storyteller and a host of the Everyday Idiots podcast and a good friend of mine. And he has his own terrifying independence story to share.
It was past midnight. It was pitch dark. There was no moon hanging in the sky. I was in the back seat of a van. My wife was next to me, 2 people in the front seat. They were supposed to be taking us from the airport to the hotel, but instead, they took a right into a very dark and desolate parking lot. It wasn't for a driving lesson. As we came to a stop, the lady in the front seat turns to me and she goes, "Did you bring the money?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "Hand it over now." And I said, "We're really tired. We've been traveling for over 30 hours. I just want to go to a hotel and get some sleep." She says, "No, I need the money now because I need to count it." I told her the money was tucked underneath my clothes. And she goes, "Well, you're going to have to get it out." So I partially disrobed, pulled money out from underneath my shirt, around my waist and around my leg, and I handed her this big old wad of cash. These were crisp $20 bills, all less than 2 years old, totaling $10,000. I couldn't see her doing it because it was so dark and there was a bench seat in front of us, but I could hear her counting every single bill because it was so crisp. So I was counting along with her. When she was done counting, I knew that it was all there. But she suddenly broke into an argument with the driver and handed him the money. And he starts counting, and I count along with him as well. When he's done, I was satisfied that all the money was there. But she turned to me and she goes, "Where's the rest of the money?" And I said, "It's all there." And she goes, "No, you're short $6,000. You see, we were there for an international adoption, and this was a core part of this process. And she tells us, if you don't come up with another $6,000 by morning, you're not going to get your child. So they drive us to the hotel, drop us off, we check in, go up to the room, and the room left a lot to be desired. The room had these 2 beds that were made out of wood, mattress that was about that thick, made of hay, and just wider than my shoulders. The windows covered by sheer curtains, but that didn't matter. I just needed to get to the phone. I needed to call the adoption agency back in Austin. I pick up the phone, and you have to call the hotel operator who connects you with the local operator, who connects you with the international operator that finally connects you to the US in Austin. This took several attempts because most of the people I talked to didn't speak English. We finally get connected to the US here in Austin. And of all things, nobody picks up. I get the office answering machine. Yes, it was 2001. I left this voicemail of desperation, of please call us back. Here's the situation. I lay out all the details. And I wait, no phone call. But we're so exhausted, just needed to get some sleep, so fell asleep. Before we knew it, there was this bright shining light right in my face like a spotlight, and it was the sun coming right through those sheer windows. It was time to get up. I popped out of bed and I ran to the phone. The little light on the phone was not flashing. There were no messages. So I called the front desk, no messages there. Those next few hours were excruciating. What were we going to do? We didn't have this money because it wasn't about whether or not we could deliver the money. It was about could we deliver $6,000 in crisp $20 bills in central Russia? No, not possible. It was time to go out to the van and meet them. We walked down to the lobby. I went to the front desk and I asked them again, "Are you sure you don't have any messages for me?" They said no. I asked the concierge. They said no. Walked out to the parking lot, opened the back door of the van, hopped in, scooted across the seat. My wife followed behind me, closed the door, and there they were, arguing again. Then the lady turns to me, Nadia, and she goes, "We got a phone call from the adoption agency. It was just an accounting error. We got the other $6,000 you had wired to us." So that was a huge relief. A little bit later that morning, we had a scheduled appointment to meet our brand new baby girl at the baby home. We pulled in, we go into the baby home. We're pulled into this separate room. It was private. They brought her in, and I held her for the very first time. And boy, did she scream. But it didn't matter. I was just so happy and pleased to see this beautiful little face in my arms. We'd eventually leave the baby home, and it's kind of stuck with me that we didn't see any other kids while we were there, and there was many kids there. We went back to the airport, flew back to Moscow, eventually made it back to Austin, and it was kind of tough because we had just left our baby in Russia, and we had to wait for a phone call. And just like a parent who might be expecting with a bag by the door, we had bags packed by our front door, just waiting for that phone call. 2 months later, it finally comes. And within 48 hours of that, we find ourselves back in Ufa, sitting in a courtroom. And in that court hearing, it was extremely tense because I couldn't understand a thing they were saying, and they very rarely interpreted anything for us. And just like the two people in the car, it sounded like everything they did was an argument. Nobody was happy in that room. And finally, as the judge strikes the gavel, everyone starts to applaud and cheer. And we were awarded our daughter, Nia. But we couldn't get her quite yet. We had to go and do a bunch of paperwork, drive around town, and do all this other stuff that had to be done. And we had to wait until the next day. When we went back in the morning, this was an unscheduled visit to the baby home. There were several kids who were older than our daughter, Nina, playing in the playground. So as we pulled up in the parking lot and the van stops, we get out and all of the little kids in the playground stop playing. They turned and they stared at us, and I couldn't help it. I stared back. There were no words exchanged, but it was as if they were saying, "Please take me home." I could only take the one. So we went inside, we scooped up Nina, went to the airport, flew back to Moscow. The very next day, the hope was that we'd go to the US Embassy, get her a US passport, and then fly back the day after. But that next day was July 4th. So it wasn't lost on me that on the day that this country celebrates its independence, we got to celebrate our daughter's freedom.
So with that, go get drinks, use the bathroom, talk amongst yourselves. We're going to take an intermission and we'll be back in 10 more minutes for 2 more stories of independence. Hi, our online friends. It is time for us to be back for more stories inside. So we're back to talk about more stories on independence. And our next storyteller, I have to say, is one of my favorites. Okay, I have a lot of favorites, but Sara Laas is particularly special to me. She has lovely stories about growing up in Laredo and living in Texas and traveling. And right now I want her to come talk about her personal fight for independence.
Can you hear me? Okay. When I tell stories, you have to time travel. And this one, we're going to go back about 50 years, half a century, not that back. And we're going to be in 1971. And I was living in a different town in a failed marriage. And I knew that I was going to have to exit. But we had talked about divorce. And he said, "You'll never make it on your own." He said, "You've never lived by yourself." And he was right. I'd always lived at home. And then up here at UT, I had lived in dormitories. And the week after I graduated, I married him. So he was right. But I also knew that things weren't going to get better, so I had to prepare. So I started preparing. And I owned a business, an employment agency, a small one, and he owned a business, a different one. But we had one credit card that had to go between the two businesses. And so I thought, okay, I want to go back to Austin because that's where I've always felt the most free. And to do that, I opened a bank account at a bank here on Congress Avenue and started putting the profits from my business into this little bank account. You know, the Boy Scouts say, be prepared. So I was trying to be prepared. And then I thought the next thing I need is my own credit card. And the law at that time said you couldn't have separate credit cards without his permission. So I finally went to him, to my husband, and I said, well, you know, bookkeeping would really be a lot easier if your business had a credit card and my business had a credit card. Oh, okay, I guess so. So I go to the bank and my banker, and he said, yeah, now we don't issue them here. We send them to this bank in Houston, our applications. But we filled it all out, and he sends the letter to the bank in Houston. And the next week I go back to the bank, and the banker says, oh, I got a letter back today. And I said, oh, okay. He says, here it is, the same one I sent them. The officer in Houston had just scrawled on the original letter, hadn't bothered to do another one, and said, we don't issue cards to wives. So there I was, still needing to get out. Things weren't getting any better. But the next January in 72, I left anyway. And I rented a small apartment on Lakeshore. Lots of students were living there. Apartments were new then. Lots of students were living there, and they had this shuttle bus that took kids back and forth, or students back and forth to class all the time. It smelled a lot like marijuana in the evenings. But it was a nice place, and my little girls, I had one child with me, and she was in school, so I got myself a job, outside sales rep for an office supply company, and was doing just fine. Except that when you have an address like I have, a lot of people don't want to take your check. And I had no credit card. And after a while, I began to feel kind of nervous about carrying around enough cash for an emergency, like a car breakdown or something or need to hire an ambulance, whatever. And I thought, okay, I still need the credit card. And we had both of us good credit. Our cars were paid for. And of course, communications weren't too great, but I felt like, okay, I had already found out that I had to live in this county for 6 months before I could file for divorce. So there was no divorce on the immediate horizon that would have freed me to get a credit card. So I'm thinking, okay, I've got this savings account and this checking account in this bank, and I better go down there and look prosperous. So I dressed up in my best suit, no sandals this day. It was pumps and stockings, high heels, best jewelry I could find, and a black briefcase. Nothing in the briefcase, but I took the black briefcase with me. And I go down to the bank and I walk up to the receptionist and I said, I'm here to apply for a credit card. And she said, let me tell the officer who's in charge of that. I went in the middle of the week because I figured there wasn't going to be a lot of traffic on a day like that. And so I sat there. She said, I'll go tell him. And she did. And I sat there. And I sat. And I sat some more. And finally, I went to her and I said, would you please tell him that I really need to see him? And if necessary, I'll stay all day because I'm not going anywhere until I talk to her. And she said, oh, okay. And she went back and she told him again. And I waited about another 10 minutes and then he did talk to me. And I went over there and I explained to him that, I hadn't been able to file for divorce yet, but I had found a really good attorney. And I was very happy with that, even though I was going to have to wait another 3 months because I'd been there 3 months. And I said, and I'm really happy because in 1972, we got this wonderful help from Sissy Farenthold in the House of Representatives and from Barbara Jordan, who was the state senator, the only woman state senator from Houston. And they had pushed through a law that a woman attorney from Dallas had been trying to get through for 59 years. Mm-hmm. And that was, since 1959, excuse my miscounting. But anyway, she had been pushing for it unsuccessfully. But then she got Sissy Farenthold on board, Barbara Jordan on board, and somehow or another they got it through, and Governor Smith signed it, and it was going to be up for a vote for a constitutional amendment in November. Now, it hadn't passed yet, so that was a risk. But I thought, these guys in the legislature didn't think that the law had been on board for a long time that women could not have their own credit cards. And I thought, I've owned a business. I've paid for my cars. I had a side gig doing interviews on television locally, live, on the local TV for a couple of years. And evidently in Texas legislature, you're not capable of making financial decisions for yourself unless you have the right body parts. And I have lots of body parts. But I didn't have the right one. At least not according to the Texas legislature. And, my ex-husband, when he would say, why don't you come home and quit being one of those women's livers? And I decided, no, I'm going to wait. Well, this guy, he finally, I don't know whether it was mentioning the lawyer or mentioning the new Equal Rights Amendment or the secretary having mentioned that I would be there all day if necessary. But he finally said, okay, we'll approve it and you should have your credit card within a week. And so at the end of the week, sure enough, in my apartment, I get this mail. And there's the credit card. And sure enough, it has two sides. And one side of independence is the struggle to get free, to get out, to get away. And the other side is to be stubborn and knock on the door until they let you in.
So I am just going to say thank you for the work you did back then to open the doors for all of us here today. So thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you for sharing that story with us. And now it is time for our final storyteller of the evening, which is the inimitable Nettie Reynolds.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to beat that story. I absolutely loved it because I was actually a child of divorce, and my mom in the mid-70s had the same experience as you. So I'm really grateful that you persisted and she persisted. So now I've established that I was at least, let's say I'm born in 64, so I'm 58. Yay for 58. And so when I was in third grade, I was obsessed with the show The Flying Nun. And it was more, I figured out later through therapy. I was obsessed with Carlos, the Las Vegas owner that always, gave the flying nun and their nunhood like extra money and stuff. So it was really that actor that I was obsessed with. But at the time, I told my mom in third grade, I want to go and be a nun because I thought that represented independence from I lived with three sisters and a mom and a dad. And when my parents got divorced, my dad always called it the escape from the estrogen tomb. And so I thought, well, I'll go and be a flying nun. So I asked my mom about it and I prayed about it. And my mom reminded me that we were Lutheran and also that I couldn't fly. So that was kind of kiboshed. And as a person that always has a backup plan for independence, I waited a couple of months and I thought, okay, we have a cul-de-sac that we live in Maryland. The Partridge Family always comes and does their neighborhood concerts in cul-de-sacs. My teacher, Mrs. Atkins, in third grade, told me I had perfect pitch. So I'm going to write to Keith Partridge, aka Keith Cassidy, and I'm going to ask him if I can join the Partridge Family. Now, my choir teacher, Mrs. Atkins, was super cool. She always smelled like pot and patchouli. And for third grade, she had our choir do the song Eleanor Rigby at our recital, which really split the parents in half, I have to tell you. And she was later let go, maybe because some parents saw her, happened to be a male parent, marching during the ERA marches without a bra in downtown DC. But I just focused on, I've got Pitch Perfect. I'm going to write to Keith Cassidy. So at that time, my older sisters always had Tiger Beat magazine. Well, we didn't buy an issue for each person. So it was always like, when is Debbie or Donna going to finally be done looking at the monkeys or whoever they were looking at and get it to me for the Partridge Family address? So in the back of that magazine, they would have the addresses where you could write. So I wrote a letter to Keith Cassidy, and I explained what my plans were and that I would really be a good like extra backup singer in the Partridge Family. And so at our dinner, I announced after I had sent the letter, hey, I'm going to leave and go with the Partridge Family. Just want everyone here to know that. Everyone looked up from their Swanson frozen dinner and said, okay. My oldest sister said, Partridge Smartridge, and then told me, why the Partridge Family wouldn't want me. Now, at the time, she was the oldest sister in the family. She was listening to Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven over and over and over again. And I knew from Bible school that if God did come back and get us, we weren't going to have to march up a stairway. We were literally going to just rise and get to go. Like we weren't going to need those extra steps on a stairway. So I just discounted her. And I waited and waited for Keith Partridge to write me back. And he didn't. And so my family moved from Maryland to Dallas when I was around in 6th grade or 7th grade. And we moved to Dallas, and I thought, well, okay, this is a whole new world in Dallas. So I'm going to really live it up here. And I didn't understand how girls in Texas at that time were not maybe as independent as I was. They loved to wear cowboy boots. They got really upset with me if I said you guys instead of y'all. So I learned y'all. And I lived in Dallas. And then I finally got to Austin when I was in my 20s. And when I got here, it was in the early 80s. And everything was amazing. Like everything was just so fantastic. You could get like 60 cents black bean tamales at Güeros, and there were the tamale house taco wars where you could get something for $1 a taco. You could go to Las Manitas and maybe see Ann Richards eating a taco there or eating breakfast there for $3. So that was pretty amazing. And I remember my dad came and visited me, and I was going to take him to Alamo Draft House because he had never been where you could eat and, watch a movie. And he came down on a Thursday, and I took him to see a movie, and I ordered food and I paid for it. And I don't even remember what movie we watched. The only thing I remember is us going to the parking lot and my dad saying, God damn it, does anyone in Austin actually work a full-time job? And I was like, they do, Dad. But really, I wasn't sure because I was a writer. I didn't know. I didn't work a full-time job. I was having fun eating 65 cents black bean tamales. And so I married here, and then I got out of a bad marriage. I had a PR firm that I sold, and I got out of bad marriage, all kind of in that vein of independence, because in Austin, my friend who was an accountant at the time told me, go to UFCU and open your own account. Go buy a Wheatsville card and become a member there. Then UFCU will help you, and you can open your own account with a Wheatsville card. So that's what I did when I was trying to get out of my marriage that was not particularly happy. And so I got out of my marriage. I had my little UFCU card, and I decided at 45 to go to seminary. Now, in Austin, what's really interesting is you can tell people, I'm going to go to seminary, and they're like, cool. And when I was at the seminary, at the Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, I met my husband, who's a punk harmonica player, which if you ever want to go to a party with a musician when you're an introvert, if the great thing that happens at parties is they'll ask my husband, "What do you play? You're a musician. What do you play?" And when he says harmonica, they're just totally quiet. And then I went to seminary to become a hospice chaplain. And so then they'll turn to me as the spouse and say, "Well, what do you do?" And I say, "Oh, I work with the dying." It is the best party trick ever for introverted people, because literally you will repel anyone from talking to you. You still get the great food, you still get the good beers, but no one really wants to do surface level kind of congenial talk with you, which is great for an introvert. So I started working for Hospice Austin. And what I realized in working for Hospice Austin as a chaplain is we all have different levels of independence that we claim at any given time. And we all have things that are really important to us that are significant of independence. And this same holds true when you're dying. And one of the things that I learned is that you never ever treat people as their disease. And I learned to walk alongside people and sit with people and remember this was a person. This isn't a cancer. This isn't Lou Gehrig's disease. This was a person who had a life. And so as a chaplain, you get to be alongside that person and you see their independence slowly ebbing away from the world. You see them not caring about if their inbox is full anymore, not caring about the tea or the china that they own, that they got, that they never used, not caring about their pool in the backyard. You see their independence moving closer to non-material things like love and what we can get from love. You know, I never was with a patient ever who told me their political affiliation. They always asked me, "Can you call my daughter? Or can you call my son? Or can you help me tell my wife that I just can't make it another week?" I was with a woman whose sole purpose for 4 weeks was to record as many voicemail messages as she could for her children. Because her independence, she knew, was coming from being independent of pain, but she knew that her children would still need her. In losing her, she wanted them to hear her voices. And I think my most significant moment of independence and learning from people who are leaving this material world behind and this kind of, you know, I always had a not enoughness feeling from going through divorce and maybe actually from Keith Partridge not responding to me. You know, this feeling of the imposter syndrome. And when you're dying, you're in your body, but you're not of your body anymore. And you get this great glimmer of life that you didn't have before. And when you get to walk beside people who are dying, you understand this different spark and this different, deeper meaning of community and family and chosen family and friends who come and gather around you and don't treat you as an object. They still see that bright soul, that unique person that you brought to the world. So I was with this very young patient. He was about 36. And he had only been married for 6 years. And he had a 2-year-old. And he was dying of a brain tumor. And he and his wife were very upset because, of course, that is fucked up. And our prayers would be, this is fucked up. What the hell? This is unfair. And I was always the chaplain. I would tell people, you can curse with me. You know, we can do things that just get out those moments where you're feeling really bereft. And so we took the china that he had been given from his family to bless his new marriage. And we sat on the back patio, and I remember the sun was shining so much. And I remember thinking, you know, for me, I can be independent and take a walk. For him, taking a walk meant really, really 35 minutes of trying to get from the bedroom to the back porch with tubes and being present to the sun because he hadn't felt the sun on his face for 3 or 4 weeks. But by God, we made it out there together, me and his wife and his child. And we took that whole set of china and we broke it on the back porch. And he cursed, fuck inboxes, fuck HEB lines, fuck Robin Leach, which I don't know how he could have even known about Robin Leach at that age, but fuck Robin Leach. Fuck worrying. Fuck worrying. And for me, as someone who has had a lifelong addiction to worrying, because when you're a chaplain, they always think, well, oh, she got a master's divinity, so she's divine, which I am not. Or, hey, you've got this like white flashing phone like Batman has where you can just call and say, hey, God, what the hell? Why did A&M lose today? What's going on with the hurricane? Why are there earthquakes? Why do young people die? You don't get those phones. You don't have any answers. You're just with someone in the middle of those things. And so we cursed all of those. And I saw that patient become completely independent of what the world puts upon us, that we struggle through, that we don't need to struggle so much through. Because at the end of the day, it's the love that we have inside. It's the families and the chosen families that we create that sustain us beyond this vessel. And so for me, that patient taught me a new thing about independence. And I never give a shit if my inbox is full anymore. Thank you.
Well, that is all we have for you tonight. Fortunately, no one has to follow that. But thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Our next show is going to be May the 4th be with you.
Yeah.
So put it on your calendars. The theme is actually going to be Reaching for the Stars, but it is on Star Wars Day. It will be here. Hopefully the weather cooperates so we can be on the lovely lawn. But put it on your calendars. In the meantime, if you're looking for stories, because you just can't wait, there are other stories and telling opportunities in Austin. There's a story showcase for my friends' classes at the Merlin Works, where you too can take storytelling classes if you want. That is Saturday night. Testify, monthly show. I believe it's the second Wednesday of every month at Barrel of Fun. Hyde Park Storytelling is on a little bit of a hiatus until they have a big announcement, but hopefully they'll be back with us after their big announcement. And the Austin Library has started storytelling open mics. But in 2 months, we'll be back here with stories about the stars. And in the meantime, we have a few more minutes here at the museum. Grab some sparkling water, chat with your friends, read our storytellers, and thank you all so much for coming. And thank you online.